Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. What's inside Diddy's personal diary that made the judge's hands shake? Why did the courtroom fall silent when the final entry was read aloud? And what names were written on the last page that caused three high-profile celebrities to immediately flee the country? The Los Angeles skyline glittered like a constellation of ambition, its glass towers reflecting the relentless sun of June 2025. In the heart of downtown, the Superior Court stood as a monolith of justice, its marble facade masking the chaos within. Courtroom 7A was a pressure cooker, its mahogany walls absorbing the weight of a trial that had seized the nation's soul. The People versus Sean Diddy Combs. The music mogul, once a titan of hip-hop and a symbol of black excellence, now faced charges that threatened to erase his legacy: racketeering, coercion, and a chilling pattern of abuse spanning decades. Whispers of freak-off parties, allegations of exploitation, and a 2018 incident in Orinda, California, had coalesced into a legal storm, one that promised to expose the dark underbelly of his empire. Outside, Figueroa Street was a circus. News vans clogged the road, their satellite dishes piercing the sky like spears. Reporters shouted updates, their voices drowned by the hum of drones capturing aerial shots. On X, Diddy trial trended alongside grainy photos of Diddy with David Beckham, their decades-long friendship now fodder for speculation. The two had bonded over fatherhood, trading pager messages during the World Cup, and Victoria Beckham had once called Diddy Puffy, with a mix of admiration and envy for his ageless swagger. But the spotlight had shifted to Beckham's son, Odell Beckham Jr., named in a 2025 civil lawsuit by Ashley Parham, who alleged a brutal assault at Diddy's Orinda estate. Though Contra Costa County Police had dismissed the claims as baseless and Odell had denied involvement, the association tainted Diddy's inner circle. David Beckham, however, remained untouched by formal accusations, his name a fleeting whisper in the gossip mill. Inside, the courtroom was a theater of tension. Spectators packed the gallery, their faces a mosaic of curiosity, outrage, and grief. Reporters perched on the edges of their seats, laptops glowing with live updates. The jury, 12 strangers bound by duty, sat rigid, their eyes darting between Diddy and the judge. Victims' families occupied the front row, their hands clasped, their silence louder than any protest. The air was thick, punctuated by the rustle of papers, the clack of a reporter's keyboard, and the faint hum of whispered conversations. Sean Diddy Combs, at 55, was a study in defiance. His tailored navy suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his gold cufflinks catching the eye like tiny suns. His jaw was set, his gaze sweeping the room with the confidence of a man who had clawed his way from Harlem's streets to global stardom. Beside him, his attorney, Marcus Reed, exuded control, his salt-and-pepper beard framing a face etched with determination. His legal pad was a battlefield of notes, strategies to dismantle the prosecution's case. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Elena Martinez reviewed her notes, her calm demeanor masking a razor-sharp resolve. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, her tailored blazer a symbol of precision. Judge Vivian Carter, 60, with gray-streaked hair and a no-nonsense air, ascended the bench. Her black robe rustled as she surveyed the room, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She banged her gavel, the sound a gunshot in the silence. "Order," she commanded. This court is now in session. The People versus Sean Combs. Case number L, a 2025-07191. Miss Martinez, call your next witness. Elena rose, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The people called Christian Combs to the stand. A collective gasp swept the room, as if the air had been sucked out. Diddy's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. Marcus froze, his pen blotting his legal pad. The spectators leaned forward, their whispers a rising tide. A reporter, her fingers trembling, tweeted, "Christian Combs just took the stand against his dad. This is seismic. Diddy trial." In the gallery, Kim Porter, Diddy's ex and Christian's mother, sat rigid, her hands clasped, her face a mask of quiet resolve. Her silk blouse was impeccable, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotion. Christian Combs, 27, stepped into the aisle. He was the spitting image of his father. Sharp cheekbones, commanding presence. But his face was pale, his steps hesitant. His black suit was simple, almost mournful, and his eyes avoided Diddy's as he approached the stand. His hands trembled as he swore the oath, his voice barely audible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the bailiff asked. "I do," Christian whispered, the words landing like a thunderclap. The jury leaned in, sensing a shift in the trial's gravity. Diddy gripped the table, his knuckles whitening, his confident mask cracking like brittle glass. Kim's eyes glistened, but she remained still, a silent pillar for her son. Elena's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through the silence. "Mr. Combs, please state your relationship to the defendant." Christian swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if the weight of the moment might crush him. "He's my father," he said, his voice trembling but clear. The room fell silent, the weight of those words a storm cloud. A juror, a young woman with braided hair, covered her mouth. Another, an older man in a plaid shirt, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. In the gallery, Ashley Parham's mother, seated among the victims' families, clutched her daughter's photo, her eyes locked on Christian. Diddy's gaze bore into his son, a mix of betrayal and desperation, his fingers twitching as if to reach out. Elena stepped closer, her tone empathetic yet probing. "Christian, this must be incredibly difficult. Can you tell us about your relationship with your father growing up?" Christian's shoulders sagged, as if the question had unlocked a floodgate of memories. He took a shaky breath, his eyes distant. "He was everything," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad built an empire from nothing. Bad Boy Records, the music, the fashion, the parties. He came from Harlem, from the streets, and made himself a king. He gave us a life I never thought possible. Mansions in Beverly Hills, private schools, vacations in St. Bart's. I wanted to be just like him, making beats in the studio, running the business, carrying the Combs name. He taught me how to negotiate, how to dream big, how to never back down. He'd call me king, tell me I was his legacy." Diddy softened, a faint smile tugging at his lips as if those memories were a lifeline. The jury nodded, some visibly moved. The teacher juror, a middle-aged woman with glasses, jotted a note, her expression wistful. In the gallery, Kim's lips trembled, her eyes fixed on her son, remembering those days when Diddy's star shone brightest. Studio sessions in New York, laughter in their Hamptons summer home, Christian's first rhyme at age 10. "But something changed, didn't it?" Elena asked, her voice steady, guiding Christian toward the heart of his testimony. When did you first notice concerns about your father's behavior? Marcus shot to his feet, his voice sharp. Objection, Your Honor. This calls for speculation and lacks specificity. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed, her gavel poised. Overruled. The witness may answer, but Ms. Martinez, keep it focused. Christian hesitated, his fingers twisting the edge of his sleeve, his eyes darting to his mother. Kim gave a subtle nod, her strength bolstering him. It started around 2016, he said slowly, his voice gaining strength. I was 19, working on my music, trying to make a name as C3, not just Diddy's son. I started spending more time at his parties, his business meetings, his inner circle. I saw things. People who worked for him, women mostly, they'd be different afterward. Quiet, scared, like they were carrying something heavy. I thought it was the industry at first. Music's tough, cutthroat. But then I heard whispers about freak-offs, these secret parties where people were pressured, controlled, pushed into things they didn't want. It didn't sit right, but I didn't want to believe it was him. The spectators shifted uncomfortably, their whispers a low hum of shock. The mechanic juror, a young man with calloused hands, scribbled furiously, his jaw tight. The retiree juror stared at Diddy, his earlier curiosity replaced by suspicion. Diddy's jaw clenched, his confidence eroding, his eyes flickering with anger and fear. A reporter tweeted, Christian Combs just hinted at freak-off parties. The plot thickens, half Diddy trial. Eleanor's questions were precise, her voice a steady guide. Can you recall a specific moment that made you question your father's actions? Christian's eyes glistened, and he took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for a plunge into icy water. March 2018, he said, his voice breaking. I was at one of his houses in Orinda, California. It was late, after a party. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd been in the studio all day, working on a track, and crashed in a guest room. I heard shouting. A woman's voice, panicked, like she was fighting for her life. I thought someone was hurt, so I went downstairs. That's when I saw her, Ashley Parham. The courtroom froze, the air heavy with anticipation. The teacher-juror's pen slipped, clattering softly. The mechanic's jaw dropped, his notebook forgotten. Ashley's mother let out a quiet sob, her hands covering her face. Diddy's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table as if to anchor himself. Kim's hands tightened in her lap, her breath shallow. She was crying, Christian continued, his voice raw, each word a wound. Covered in some kind of oil, her clothes torn, trying to leave. She was shaking, her eyes wild, like she'd seen a ghost. My dad was there, in the living room, with others. Odell Beckham Jr., Drusky, a few guys I didn't know. They were laughing, like it was a game, like her fear was entertainment. There was music playing, loud, but it couldn't drown out her voice. She kept saying, "Let me go, please, let me go." I didn't understand at first. I just stood there, frozen, watching her stumble toward the door. The room was a tableau of shock. The young woman juror wiped a tear, her hand trembling. In the gallery, Ashley's sister clutched her mother's arm, their tears silent but fierce. A reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard. Christian Combs just implicated Diddy, Odell Beckham Jr., and Drusky in the 2018 Orinda incident. Courtroom is stunned. Diddy trial. What did you do? Eleanor asked, her voice soft but piercing, drawing Christian deeper into the memory. I froze, Christian admitted, tears streaming down his face. I was 20. Just a kid trying to make my dad proud. I went back to my room, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But it haunted me. Her eyes, her voice, the way they laughed. The next day, I asked my dad about it, in private, at his office in LA. He was calm, like it was nothing. He said it was just business, that Ashley had agreed to everything, that she was playing a role. I didn't buy it, but I wanted to. I kept pushing, asking questions over weeks, months. I'd catch him at home, in Miami, in New York, begging him to tell me it wasn't true. Finally, one night at his Miami house, he snapped. We were on the balcony, the ocean roaring below. He grabbed my shoulders, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to keep the empire strong. You'll understand one day, King." That's when I knew. Diddy buried his face in his hands, a choked sob escaping him, the sound raw and guttural. The victims' families clutched each other, their tears a mix of pain and validation. Kim's eyes were wet, but she remained still, her strength a silent anchor. The jury was riveted, their faces a gallery of shock, sorrow, and dawning realization. Judge Carter banged her gavel, her voice sharp. "Order, Mr. Combs, continue." Christian's voice was a whisper, each word a blade. I loved my dad. I wanted to protect him, to believe he was still the man who carried me on his shoulders, who danced with me in the studio, who called me his legacy. But I couldn't unsee Ashley's face. I couldn't unhear his words. I started therapy, talked to my mom. She told me the truth doesn't hide forever. I wrote it all down, every detail, in a journal, because I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe with it inside me. I realized I had to come forward, for Ashley, for the others, for the women whose names I'll never know. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. The courtroom was a sea of emotion. Diddy's shoulders shaking, Christian's tear-streaked face, the jury's stunned silence. Elena held up a leather-bound journal, its edges worn, marked as Exhibit 12. "This is Christian's journal from 2018, she said, her voice steady. "It corroborates his account, detailing the Orinda incident and his conversations with the defendant." The jury craned to see the journal, its pages a silent testament to the truth. Diddy's eyes followed it, his breathing shallow, as if it were a guillotine poised to fall. Ashley's mother nodded, her tears falling freely, as if the journal were a lifeline to her daughter's justice. The courtroom air was heavy, thick with the residue of Christian Combs' devastating testimony. The jury sat rigid, their faces a gallery of shock and suspicion, their notebooks filled with hurried scrawls. Sean Diddy Combs, once a towering figure of charisma, slumped at the defendant's table, his navy suit creased, his gold cufflinks dull under the fluorescent glare. His hands, usually steady, trembled as they gripped the table's edge, his knuckles pale against his dark skin. Beside him, Marcus Reed, his attorney, rose to his feet, his tailored charcoal suit rumpled from days of relentless pressure. The trial had taken its toll. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his salt and pepper beard seemed grayer, as if the case had aged him overnight. Yet his voice, when he spoke, was strained but professional, a carefully calibrated blend of empathy and skepticism. "Mr. Combs," Marcus began, addressing Christian on the witness stand, "I'm deeply sorry you're in this position. It's a heavy burden to testify against your father." His tone was measured, almost paternal, designed to soften the jury's perception of his aggressive intent. He adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture to steady himself, and stepped closer to the stand, his polished loafers clicking on the polished floor. "Let's clarify a few points. You testified that you were at a party in Orinda, California, In March 2018, late at night. A chaotic environment, yes? Music blaring, people coming and going, perhaps alcohol or other substances in play. Isn't it possible, given you were only 20, young and impressionable, that you were under the influence yourself, that your memory of the events in such a frenetic setting might be flawed or incomplete? Christian's gaze hardened, his tear-streaked face tightening with resolve. The soft vulnerability that had marked his earlier testimony vanished, replaced by a steely determination. He leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the edge of the witness stand, his black suit jacket creasing at the shoulders. "I wasn't drunk," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "I hadn't touched a drink that night. I was in the studio all day, working on a track, trying to finish a verse for my mixtape. I was sober, clear-headed. I saw what I saw. I heard what he said." He paused, his eyes flicking briefly to Diddy, whose head was bowed, avoiding his son's gaze. "That journal isn't a lie. I wrote it the next morning. Every detail, Ashley's cries, the oil on her skin, the laughter, because I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake it. It was burned into me." The jury shifted, their eyes locked on Christian. The teacher juror, a middle-aged woman with wire-rimmed glasses, stopped writing, her pen hovering as she absorbed his conviction. The mechanic, a young man with calloused hands, leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by a furrowed brow of belief. In the gallery, Kim Porter, Christian's mother, sat with her hands clasped tightly, her silk blouse immaculate, but her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Her expression was a mix of pride and pain, her lips pressed into a thin line as she watched her son stand firm. Marcus faltered, his confidence visibly shaken. A bead of sweat glistened on his temple, and he adjusted his glasses, buying time. The jury's growing trust in Christian was palpable, a tide turning against the defense. He pivoted, his voice sharper, tinged with desperation. "Your Honor, we request a sidebar," he said, striding toward the bench, his legal pad clutched like a shield. "This journal, Exhibit 12, wasn't disclosed in discovery until last week, a clear violation of procedure. The defense was blindsided, and we demand an explanation." Elena Martinez rose, unfazed, her tailored blazer as crisp as her demeanor. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Judge Carter's without flinching. "The journal was submitted per the court's deadline, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "The defense was notified on June 10th, as documented in our filings. Mr. Reed's team had ample time to review it." Judge Carter's eyes flicked between the attorneys, her expression as unyielding as granite. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back severely, and her wire-rimmed glasses caught the light, giving her an air of implacable authority. She leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "The evidence is admissible, Mr. Reed. The court finds no violation. Proceed." Marcus returned to his table, defeated, his legal pad a chaotic mess of crossed-out strategies and frantic notes. Diddy leaned toward him, his voice a harsh whisper, his hands gesturing wildly. "You gotta fix this, Marcus," he hissed, his eyes darting to the jury, whose faces betrayed their eroding trust. "That journal's killing me." Marcus nodded curtly, his jaw tight. But his slumped shoulders told a different story, a man grasping at straws in a losing battle. In the gallery, Kim's eyes followed Marcus, her expression a complex blend of pity and resolve. She knew the weight of truth, had seen it in Christian's sleepless nights, his tearful confessions to her in their quiet Bel Air home. She adjusted her pearl earrings, a nervous habit, and whispered a silent prayer for her son's strength. The spectators murmured, their whispers a low hum, and a reporter's fingers danced across her laptop, tweeting, "Defense is crumbling. Christian Combs stands firm on journal. Diddy trial." Marcus, refusing to concede, took a bold gamble. "Your Honor, the defense calls Tasha Reynolds," he announced, his voice regaining some of its earlier command. The courtroom stirred, a ripple of surprise passing through the gallery. Tasha Reynolds, 30, a former bad boy intern, stepped forward, her cheap navy blazer ill-fitting, her nervous smile betraying her unease. Her heels clicked uncertainly as she took the stand, her eyes darting to Diddy, who gave her a subtle nod, his face unreadable. "Ms. Reynolds," Marcus began, his tone soothing. "You were at the Orinda party in March 2018, correct? Can you tell us what you saw?" Tasha nodded, her voice shaky, her hands twisting a tissue. "Yes, I was there," she said, glancing at Diddy again, as if seeking reassurance. "I worked for Bad Boy, running errands, assisting at events. It was just a party. Music, dancing, drinks, nothing weird. Ashley, Miss Parham, she seemed fine. I saw her laughing, dancing with some guys, having fun. Christian must have misunderstood what he saw. It was late, dark, chaotic." The jury listened, but their faces were skeptical, their earlier trust in Christian unshaken. The teacher juror raised an eyebrow, her pen poised but unmoving. The mechanic crossed his arms, his jaw tight. Diddy's eyes flickered with hope, but his hands remained clenched, betraying his anxiety. Elena rose for cross-examination, her movements precise, her eyes locked on Tasha like a predator sizing up prey. "Ms. Reynolds," she began, her voice deceptively gentle, "isn't it true that you signed a non-disclosure agreement with Mr. Combs's company in 2019, receiving a $50,000 payout shortly after leaving your intern position?" Tasha's smile faltered, her tissue shredding in her hands. I signed something, yeah," she stammered, her eyes darting to the floor. "But it was standard, just part of the job." "And isn't it also true," Elena pressed, her voice sharpening, "that you were recently hired as a consultant for Mr. Combs's new venture, Revolt Media, in March 2025, despite having no relevant experience in media or consulting, a position that pays $80,000 annually?" The courtroom gasped, the revelation landing like a bombshell. The jury's faces hardened, their skepticism now directed at Tasha. The teacher juror scribbled furiously, her glasses slipping down her nose. The mechanic shook his head, his lips curling in disdain. Tasha's face flushed, her voice barely audible. I don't remember the details," she mumbled, her eyes darting to Diddy, who stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his hope extinguished. Elena held up a document, marked Exhibit 14, a contract bearing Tasha's signature. "This is the NDA, Your Honor, and the consultancy agreement, both linking Ms. Reynolds to Mr. Combs's financial influence." She turned to Tasha, her voice cold. "Did Mr. Combs or his team instruct you to testify today to contradict Christian Combs' account?" Tasha's shoulders slumped, her credibility in tatters. "No, I just wanted to tell the truth," she whispered, but her words lacked conviction. The jury's faces were stone, their trust in the defense shattered. A reporter tweeted, "Defense witness flops, NDA payout, and shady job exposed." Diddy trial. In the gallery, Ashley's mother, clutching her daughter's photo, let out a quiet sob, her tears a mix of relief and rage. Marcus sat, his face grim, knowing the gamble had backfired. Diddy's hands covered his face, a low groan escaping him, the weight of his empire's collapse pressing down. Kim's eyes met Christian's, a silent acknowledgement of his courage, her pride, a beacon in the storm. The courtroom settled, the sting of Tasha's failed testimony lingering like smoke. Elena Martinez stood, her posture commanding, her tailored blazer a symbol of her unshakable resolve. "The people call Dr. Rachel Nguyen," she announced, her voice resonating with authority. The spectators leaned forward, sensing a shift in the trial's momentum, their whispers a soft undercurrent. The jury straightened, their notebooks at the ready, their faces eager for clarity after the defense's unraveling. Dr. Rachel Nguyen ascended the stand with a poised, authoritative presence, her steps measured, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon that gleamed under the courtroom lights. Her tailored grey suit was understated but impeccable, and her glasses, framed in sleek silver, caught the light, giving her an air of intellectual precision. At 38, she was a renowned psychologist specializing in power dynamics and trauma, her CV a litany of accolades, PhD from Stanford, publications in top journals, and expert testimony in high-profile cases. She adjusted her glasses, her movements deliberate, and faced Elena, her demeanor calm but commanding, a beacon of expertise in the chaotic trial. "Dr. Nguyen," Elena began, her voice steady, "you're a leading expert in the psychology of power and control. Can you explain why a family member's testimony, like Christian Combs, carries such profound weight in cases involving powerful individuals?" Dr. Nguyen nodded, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the courtroom's tension like a bell. "In cases like this, where the defendant wields significant power, social, financial, cultural, there exists what I call a circle of silence," she explained, her hands gesturing subtly to emphasize her point. "This is a protective barrier maintained by a complex interplay of loyalty, fear, complicity, or even denial. Family members, particularly those as close as a son like Christian, are uniquely positioned to see beyond the carefully curated public persona. They witness private moments, conversations, behaviors, admissions that reveal the unvarnished truth. When someone like Christian, who loves his father deeply and has benefited from his success, chooses to testify against him, it signals a critical breach in that circle. It's a moral threshold, a deliberate choice to prioritize truth over loyalty, often at great personal cost." The jury nodded, her words sinking in, like stones in still water. The teacher juror wrote furiously, her pen scratching the page, her glasses fogging slightly from the intensity of her focus. The mechanic leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by rapt attention, his calloused hands resting on his notebook. The retiree juror, an elderly man with deep-set eyes, stared at Dr. Nguyen, his expression one of dawning understanding. In the gallery, a spectator whispered to her neighbor, "That makes sense," her voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of revelation. Dr. Nguyen continued, her voice gaining intensity, her eyes sweeping the courtroom to include the jury, the spectators, even Diddy, who sat hunched, his bravado gone, his hands folded tightly in his lap. "Christian's testimony is particularly compelling because it aligns with established patterns of coercive control," she said, her tone both academic and impassioned. His account of the Orinda incident, Ashley Parham's distress, the laughter of the perpetrators, the defendant's dismissive justification, mirrors documented behaviors in power abuse. The laughter he described, for instance, is a deliberate tactic to normalize harm, to desensitize participants and bystanders, making the unacceptable seem routine. It's a form of psychological manipulation designed to erode empathy and accountability. The courtroom was silent, her words a clarion call that reverberated through the mahogany walls. Ashley's mother, seated in the front row, wept quietly, her hands clutching a tissue, her daughter's photo pressed against her chest. Kim's eyes were fixed on Dr. Nguyen, a flicker of pride for her son's courage shining through her stoic facade. The jury's faces were a gallery of dawning realization, their earlier doubts about Christian's motives evaporating like mist in sunlight. Dr. Nguyen leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering, drawing the jury into her analysis. The defendant's admission to Christian, "Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to keep the empire strong," is particularly telling, she said, her eyes locking briefly with Elena's, a silent acknowledgement of the testimony's weight. This reflects a mindset where power justifies any means, where victims become collateral damage in the pursuit of dominance. It's a hallmark of narcissistic leadership, where the individual's empire, be it a business, a brand, or a legacy, takes precedence over human dignity. Christian's decision to document this in his journal, to seek therapy, to confront his own complicity, and ultimately to speak today, is a profound act of courage. It breaks a cycle that thrives on secrecy, exposing the truth not just for Ashley Parham, but for countless others who may never have a voice. The silence was deafening, the jury's attention unbroken. The teacher juror's pen trembled, her notes a chaotic scrawl of key phrases. Circle of silence, coercive control, moral threshold. The mechanic's jaw was tight, his eyes glistening with a mix of anger and admiration for Christian's bravery. The retiree juror nodded slowly, his earlier suspicion of Diddy solidifying into conviction. In the gallery, a reporter tweeted, "Dr. Nguyen just dismantled Diddy's defense with surgical precision." Diddy trial Ashley's sister, seated beside her mother, reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, their tears a silent testament to the truth's power. Dr. Nguyen concluded, her voice softening but no less commanding. Christian's testimony is not just evidence. It's a rupture in the defendant's narrative of invincibility. It shows that even those closest to power can choose accountability, can choose to dismantle the systems that protect abusers. His courage is a beacon, illuminating the path to justice. Elena nodded, her expression one of quiet triumph. "No further questions, Your Honor," she said, returning to her table, her notes neatly organized, her confidence unshaken. Marcus rose, his cross-examination brief and faltering, his questions about Dr. Nguyen's methodology brushed aside with her calm expertise. The jury's faces told the story. The defense was losing ground, and Christian's truth was unassailable. The trial pressed on, each day a relentless assault on Diddy's crumbling defenses. Christian's testimony, bolstered by the journal and Dr. Nguyen's piercing analysis, had shifted the courtroom's tide. Elena Martinez, relentless and precise, introduced a cascade of corroborating evidence, each piece a nail in the defense's coffin. A burner phone, recovered from Diddy's Miami property, contained cryptic texts to an unnamed associate. "Handle the Orinda thing. Keep it quiet," one read, dated April 2018. Non-disclosure agreements, signed by former Bad Boy employees, hinted at a pattern of silencing dissent, their clauses draconian, their payouts substantial. A grainy security video from the Orinda estate, though blurry, showed a distressed woman, presumably Ashley Parham, stumbling out the front gate, her silhouette stark against the floodlights. The video wasn't conclusive, but it fueled the jury's doubts, their whispers growing louder with each exhibit. Marcus fought back, his desperation palpable. He called character witnesses, a music executive who praised Diddy's mentorship, a charity organizer who lauded his philanthropy, a childhood friend who swore he was a good man at heart. But their words rang hollow, their polished testimonies overshadowed by Christian's raw honesty, the journal's stark pages, and Dr. Nguyen's incisive analysis. The jury's faces were impassive, their trust in Diddy eroded, their notebooks filled with Eleanor's evidence rather than Marcus's platitudes. A new subplot emerged, adding a layer of searing drama to the trial. Eleanor, sensing an opportunity to deepen the narrative of Diddy's influence, called Lena Carter, a former assistant to Diddy who had worked for him from 2017 to 2020. Lena, 40, stepped into the courtroom with a weary but determined air, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the opulence of Diddy's world. Her hands trembled as she took the oath, her eyes avoiding Diddy's, who stared at her with a mix of fury and fear, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the table. "Miss Carter," Elena began, her voice calm but probing, "you were Mr. Combs' personal assistant during the period surrounding the Orinda incident. Can you share any relevant observations from that time?" Lena took a deep breath, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I was his right hand," she said, her eyes distant, as if revisiting a painful past. "I managed his schedule, his travel, his calls. In 2019, about a year after Orinda, I overheard a phone call that stuck with me. It was late, in his New York office. He was on speakerphone with David Beckham. Mr. Combs called him Dave, like they were old friends. They were arguing, something I'd never heard before." The courtroom stirred, a ripple of shock passing through the gallery. The jury leaned forward, their notebooks forgotten, their eyes wide. Diddy's face was a mask of fury, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing shallow. Marcus shot to his feet, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay and irrelevant to the charges." Elena countered, her voice unwavering. "Your Honor, this testimony establishes the defendant's attempts to manage the fallout of the Orinda incident, directly relevant to the pattern of coercion." Judge Carter's eyes narrowed, her gavel poised. "Overruled," she said firmly. "The testimony is admissible, but Ms. Martinez, keep it focused." Lena continued, her voice gaining strength. "Mr. Combs was upset, pacing the office, his voice loud. He said, 'Dave, I need you to vouch for me if this Orinda thing comes up. People trust you. Your name carries weight.' David sounded angry, almost panicked. He kept saying, 'My son's not involved, Sean. Keep my family out of this. I don't know what you did, but don't drag Odell into it.' I don't think David knew the details. He sounded blindsided, like he was trying to protect his son." Mr. Combs slammed the phone down, cursing, saying, "He'll come around." The revelation sent the courtroom into chaos. The spectators gasped, their whispers a rising tide. The teacher juror's pen fell, clattering on the floor, her face pale with shock. The mechanic's jaw dropped, his eyes flicking to Diddy, whose fury was now tinged with desperation. A reporter tweeted, "Bombshell. Diddy tried to get David Beckham to cover for Orinda." Diddy Trial X erupted, with posts speculating about Beckham's knowledge. Did Beckham know Diddy's secrets? Poor Odell, caught in the crossfire. Christian, watching from the gallery, felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He'd idolized David Beckham, seen him as an uncle, shared laughter over soccer matches at their London estate, swapped stories about music and fame. Had his testimony, his truth, dragged an innocent family into the fire? He glanced at Kim, his eyes pleading for reassurance. Kim sensed his turmoil, squeezing his hand tightly, her voice a whisper. "You did what was right, baby," she said, her eyes fierce with conviction. "The truth hurts, but it heals. You're not responsible for his choices." Eleanor pressed on, her questions precise. "Miss Carter, did Mr. Combs take any actions after this call to mitigate the Orinda incident?" Lena nodded, her voice steady. "Yes. The next day, he had me shred a stack of documents, party guest lists, contracts, expense reports. He said, 'Lena, we're cleaning house.' I didn't read them, but I saw Orinda on one. Later, he gave me a bonus, $10,000, and told me to keep quiet about the office. I quit a year later. I couldn't live with it anymore." The jury's faces were stone, their trust in Diddy shattered. The teacher juror wrote furiously, her notes a catalogue of betrayal. The mechanic shook his head, his lips curling in disgust. Ashley's mother wept, her hands trembling, her daughter's photo a talisman of justice. Diddy's hands covered his face, a low groan escaping him. The weight of his empire's collapse unbearable. Marcus's cross-examination was feeble, his questions about Lena's memory and motives brushed aside by her calm resolve. "I kept a log," Lena said, producing a small notebook marked Exhibit 15, detailing the call and the shredding. "I knew one day I'd have to speak." The jury's eyes followed the notebook, its pages a damning echo of Christian's journal. The revelation sent X into a frenzy, with David Beckham issuing a statement, "I have no knowledge of any wrongdoing by Sean Combs and have always maintained my son's innocence. My family has no involvement in these allegations." But the damage was done, the jury whispered, their eyes flicking to Diddy, whose empire was unraveling thread by thread. The gavel's final echo faded, but the Los Angeles Superior Courtroom 7A held its breath, as if unwilling to release the weight of the trial that had consumed it. Sean Diddy Combs, once a titan whose music and swagger defined an era, was no longer the king of the courtroom. His guilty plea, a raw, tear-soaked confession, had stripped him bare, reducing his empire to a cautionary tale etched in the public's consciousness. As the bailiff snapped handcuffs around his wrists, the metallic clink reverberated like a death knell. Diddy's head was bowed, his navy suit rumpled, its once crisp lines now sagging under the weight of his surrender. His eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, avoided the gallery, where the remnants of his legacy watched in silence. The courtroom emptied slowly, spectators filing out like mourners at a funeral. But the weight of the moment lingered, etched into the mahogany walls, the worn benches, the stale air thick with the scent of sweat and ink. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the June sun blazed mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across the marble plaza. Christian Combs stood beside his mother, Kim Porter, facing a swarm of reporters whose microphones formed a bristling forest of expectation. The Los Angeles skyline loomed behind them, its glass towers indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Christian, 27, was a shadow of his father's charisma, his black suit somber, his face pale but resolute. His eyes, still red from tears shed in the courtroom, carried a quiet strength, a flicker of hope amid the wreckage. Kim, elegant in a cream silk blouse and tailored slacks, stood with her arm around him, her presence a silent fortress. Her dark hair was swept back, revealing a face etched with pride and pain. Her pearl earrings catching the light as she tilted her head to shield Christian from the camera's glare. The reporters surged forward, their questions a cacophony. "Christian, how do you feel about your father's guilty plea?" shouted a woman from CNN, her notepad clutched tightly. "Will you visit him in prison?" called a man from TMZ, his camera flashing. Christian raised a hand, his gesture weary but commanding, silencing the clamor. He took a deep breath, the air hot and dry, and stepped closer to the microphones, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I love my dad," he said, his words deliberate, each one a stone, laid on a path to redemption. "I always will. He gave me everything. A name, a dream, a life most people only imagine. He taught me to chase the stars, to build something from nothing, to carry the Combs legacy with pride." His voice cracked and he paused, swallowing hard, his eyes scanning the crowd for a friendly face. But the truth had to come out. For Ashley Parham, for the women who suffered in silence, for the ones whose names we'll never know. For them, I had to speak, and for him too. Maybe now he can find peace, face what he's done. I hope he does. I pray he does. The reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras clicking like a swarm of insects. Kim's arm tightened around Christian, her presence a silent strength, her eyes glistening but unyielding. The crowd parted slightly, and a figure emerged, Ashley's mother, Regina Parham, her graying hair pulled into a neat bun, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the media's frenzy. Her eyes were wet but warm, her hands clutching a small framed photo of Ashley, her daughter's smile frozen in time. She stepped forward, her steps hesitant but determined, and stopped before Christian, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Thank you," Regina whispered, her words barely audible, but carrying the weight of a mother's grief. "You gave my daughter a voice, Christian. You gave her justice. I know it cost you, but you did what was right." Her tears fell freely now, tracing paths down her weathered cheeks, and she reached out, touching Christian's arm briefly, a gesture of gratitude and absolution. Christian's throat tightened, his eyes brimming anew. He nodded, unable to speak, his hand covering hers for a moment, a silent pact between two souls bound by loss. Kim's lips trembled, and she stepped forward, embracing Regina, their shared pain a bridge across the chasm of the trial. The reporters fell silent, their cameras lowering, a rare moment of respect in the media storm. A young journalist, her eyes misty, tweeted, "Christian Combs and Ashley's mom share a tearful moment on the courthouse steps. You know, Diddy trial." That evening, the news broadcasts were relentless, their anchors dissecting the trial with clinical precision. CNN's headline blazed across screens. "Sean Combs pleads guilty, faces up to 15 years in prison." NBC's coverage was equally stark. A stunning end to a trial that captivated the nation. X exploded with reactions, a digital cacophony of triumph, anger, and reflection. "Justice for the victims," posted at Survivor Strong, a handle linked to a victims advocacy group, garnering thousands of likes. "Christian Combs is a hero," tweeted at LA Observer, a local blogger with a photo of Christian's tearful statement. "This is bigger than Diddy. It's about accountability," wrote at TruthSeeker22, a post that went viral, quoted alongside Dr. Rachel Nguyen's testimony. "The circle of silence is broken." In the days that followed, the story metastasized into a cultural touchstone. Netflix announced a documentary, Empire of Silence, promising an unflinching look at Diddy's rise and fall. The New York Times published a sprawling think piece, The Cost of Power, Lessons from the Combs Trial, dissecting the intersections of race, wealth, and justice. Survivors of abuse, inspired by Christian's courage, began sharing their stories on X. Their hashtags, Break the Silence, She's Justice for Ashley, trending globally. A young woman in Chicago posted a video, her voice trembling as she recounted her own assault, crediting Christian's testimony for giving her strength. "If he could face his dad, I can face my truth," she said, her post amassing millions of views. Christian retreated to Kim's Bel Air home, a sprawling estate tucked behind iron gates, its gardens a sanctuary from the world's clamor. The house was quiet, its marble floors cool underfoot, its walls adorned with photos of happier times. Diddy and Christian in the studio, Kim and Christian at his high school graduation. He sat in the living room, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering Los Angeles skyline, and grappled with the cost of his choice. The weight of betraying his father pressed on him, a stone in his chest. But the letters that arrived daily, handwritten notes, emails, even drawings from children, buoyed him. One, from a survivor in Atlanta, read, "You showed me I'm not alone. Your courage saved me." Another, from a young man in Harlem, said, "You made me believe truth can win, even when it hurts." Kim, ever his anchor, sorted through the letters, her hands steady despite her own grief. She framed one, a simple note from a mother in Oakland. "You showed us truth can heal. Thank you, Christian." She hung it in the living room, beside a photo of Christian as a boy, smiling in Diddy's arms. "This is your legacy now," she told him, her voice soft but firm, her eyes meeting his with unwavering love. Christian nodded, his throat tight, and pulled her into a hug, the first moment of peace he'd felt since the trial began. Diddy, confined to a stark cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center, began writing, his words a lifeline in the darkness. The cell was small, its concrete walls cold, its single window barred, offering a sliver of sky. He sat at a metal desk, a cheap pen in hand, and poured his soul onto lined paper, his handwriting jagged, unpolished, a man stripped of pretense. He wrote to his children, Christian, Justin, Delilah, Jesse, each letter a confession, an apology, a plea for forgiveness. To Christian he wrote, "You were braver than I ever was, King. I built an empire, but you built truth. I'm sorry I failed you." To Ashley Parham he wrote, "Your face haunts me. I took your light, and I'll spend my life making it right." To the world he drafted a public letter, its words raw. "I was a king, but kings fall when they forget their people. I'm sorry. I'll spend my life atoning." The letters piled up, some sent, others tucked beneath his thin mattress, a testament to a man grappling with his sins. The guards, hardened by years in the system, noticed a change. Diddy's bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet introspection, his eyes often wet as he wrote late into the night. One guard, a young woman who'd followed the trial, slipped him a contraband copy of Christian's single, Break the Silence, a small act of mercy that went unreported. The Los Angeles skyline glittered, its indifference a stark contrast to the human drama below. But in the quiet of the night, the story of Diddy's fall was more than a scandal. It was a reckoning. A father's empire, built on ambition and power, had been undone by his son's courage, a legacy tarnished but not without hope. The truth, painful and raw, had carved a path toward healing, for Ashley, for the victims, for Christian, and perhaps, in time, for the man who had once been a king. The city slept, but the echoes of the trial lingered, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall when the truth demands it. 6 months later, The Los Angeles Community Center on Crenshaw Boulevard hummed with life, its modest auditorium filled with a diverse crowd. Local youth in hoodies and sneakers, survivors in quiet solidarity, advocates in buttoned-up blouses, their notepads ready. The room was warm, its walls adorned with murals of resilience, vibrant depictions of hands breaking chains, faces lifted to the sky. The stage was small, its wooden floor scuffed from years of use, but it glowed under soft spotlights, a beacon of hope in a world still healing from the scars of the trial. Christian Combs stood at the center, his guitar slung over his shoulder, its polished wood catching the light. At 28, he was no longer just Diddy's son. He was a voice, a symbol, a man carving his own path. His black t-shirt bore the logo of his foundation, Break the Silence, a non-profit funded by his music to support survivors of abuse. His latest single, Break the Silence, had climbed the Billboard charts. Its raw lyrics, truth cuts deep, but it sets you free, resonating with millions. The song was more than music. It was a tribute to resilience, a call to action, its proceeds fueling the foundation's work. Counseling, legal aid, safe houses for those escaping abuse. Christian adjusted the microphone, his hands steady, but his heart racing. The crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on him, their anticipation a tangible force. He scanned the room, taking in the faces. Teenagers with wary hope, mothers with tear-streaked cheeks, men grappling with their own silent scars. His gaze settled on a young woman in the front row, her braided hair adorned with beads, her face marked by quiet strength. She wore a purple scarf, the color of survivor advocacy, and her eyes met his, unflinching, a mirror of his own resolve. Her name, he'd learned earlier, was Maya, a 22-year-old who'd escaped an abusive relationship, inspired by Christian's testimony to seek help. "This is for you," Christian said, his voice low but resonant, carrying to the back of the room. He strummed the first chord, the notes soft but piercing, filling the space with a melody that was both mournful and defiant. The crowd leaned in, some swaying, others clutching hands, as Christian's voice rose, raw and soulful. "In the dark, I found my voice, broke the chains, I had no choice. Truth's a blade, it cuts so deep, but it's the only way to be free." The music swelled, the auditorium alive with emotion. Maya's eyes glistened, her hands clasped tightly, her lips mouthing the lyrics, a silent vow to keep fighting. A teenage boy in the back, his hoodie pulled low, wiped a tear. His first visit to the center, prompted by a friend who'd seen Christian's story on X. An older woman, a survivor advocate, nodded, her notepad filled with plans for a new shelter, inspired by the foundation's model. Kim Porter sat in the second row, her silk scarf a splash of color, her eyes shining with pride. She'd become a board member of the foundation, her quiet strength guiding its mission, her own journey of healing intertwined with her son's. As the song ended, the crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a cathartic release. Christian smiled, a rare lightness in his expression, and spoke into the microphone, his voice steady. "This foundation isn't about me," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "It's about us. Every one of you who's fought, who's spoken, who's survived. We're breaking the silence together, building something stronger than any empire. Thank you for being here, for being the light." He stepped off the stage, greeted by hugs and handshakes, his guitar still slung over his shoulder. Maya approached, her scarf slipping slightly, her voice soft but firm. "Your song saved me," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I heard it after I left him, and it gave me courage to keep going. Thank you, Christian. He nodded, his throat tight, and handed her a card for the Foundation's counseling services, his voice gentle. You're the brave one, Maya. Keep shining. The event continued, with speeches from advocates, performances by local youth, and a slideshow of the Foundation's work. Photos of safe houses, therapy groups, survivors smiling at graduation ceremonies. X buzzed with updates, posts, tagged, number sign, break the silence. Christian Combs just performed at his Foundation event. This is what healing looks like. The legacy isn't Diddy's anymore, it's Christian's. A viral video of the performance, shot by a teenager in the crowd, amassed millions of views. Its caption simple: Truth wins. Far from the vibrant auditorium, in the stark confines of the Metropolitan Detention Center, Diddy sat in his cell, the concrete walls cold and unyielding. The room was small, its single-barred window offering a sliver of grey sky, its metal bunk creaking under his weight. A contraband radio, smuggled by a sympathetic guard, rested on his desk, its static hum a faint lifeline to the outside world. The guard, a young woman who'd followed the trial, had slipped it to him with a whispered, "Your son's doing good out there." Diddy had nodded, his eyes wet, too grateful to speak. He tuned the radio, its dials scratchy, until he caught a faint broadcast of Christian's performance, the final notes of Break the Silence filtering through the static. The lyrics reached him, truth's a blade, it cuts so deep, and a tear traced his cheek, falling onto the letter he was writing, its ink smudging. He closed his eyes, picturing Christian's face, the boy he'd called King, now a man forging a new legacy. The image was vivid: Christian's sharp cheekbones, his steady gaze, the guitar slung over his shoulder, a symbol of creation, not destruction. Diddy whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible in the cell's silence. "I'm proud of you, King." The words were a prayer, a confession, a hope that his son might one day read his letters, might one day forgive him. He picked up his pen, adding to the letter, "Your music is the truth I couldn't face. Keep singing, son. Keep breaking the silence." The world turned, its cities pulsing with life, its skies vast and unyielding. In Los Angeles, the community center's lights dimmed, the crowd dispersing into the night, their hearts lighter, their resolve stronger. In the detention center, Diddy's radio fell silent, but his pen moved, each word a step toward atonement. The truth, once buried beneath layers of power and denial, shone like a star, its light reaching Ashley, the victims, Christian, and even the man who had once been a king. The story of the trial was no longer just a reckoning. It was a rebirth, a testament to the courage to speak, to heal, to rebuild.